We begin the 8 o'clock hour with the Justice Department, which is suing Texas over its new law banning abortions after about 6 weeks. Now, the measure effectively prohibits nearly all abortions there and is the latest challenge to the 1973 Supreme Court decision, Roe v. Wade. Now in a new book, The Family Roe, An American Story, the daughters of the woman, known as Jane Roe, talk about their mother for the very first time. Melissa Mills, the oldest daughter of Jane Roe, whose real name is Norma McCorvey, spoke to our Jan Crawford. They talked about how the new law is threatening her mother's legacy.
Have you followed the law in Texas? Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on that?
That's what I just think it's terrible. I think it's terrible. At 6 weeks, you don't even know you're pregnant. Most women don't know till they're 8 weeks or longer, further along. We're going backwards. We're not going forwards. I mean, we've had all these strides like gay marriages, marijuana being, legalized. Yeah. Now we're going back to a woman has no choice of her own body.
The author of The Family Roe, Joshua Prager, is the first person to find and bring all three of Norma McCorvey's daughters together. He joins us for his first interview about the new book. Josh, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Number one, let me just say it's a very big book. You devoted 10 years of your life to the research about that. We'll talk about why it was so important to you. But I didn't know, and I was glad to find out that a lot of people didn't know that baby Roe is still alive.
Yeah,
I think with this case, you just assumed that she had been aborted. Did you know that?
I did not know that. I had assumed, I think like many of us, that the woman who had brought about the legal right to abortion had an abortion herself. But then I saw a mention in an article that she'd actually had a child. And I said to myself, wow, I read that in 2010. You mentioned it took me a long time. That woman would have, or man, I didn't know, but at that point been 40 years old. And I said to myself, if he or she knows who she is, then that's probably a big burden to carry.
You write that abortion is very complicated, that whenever you write, you're sort of declaring sides or choosing sides. But you wanted to make a point to humanize all of the people in this story, because Norma McCorvey, I have to say, was tough. She was very loose with the truth.
Yep.
And I think that's being kind. And she had three daughters from three different men and didn't raise any of them.
That's right. She gave all three of her children up to adoption. The first one was actually raised by her own mother. The other two were given up for adoption to families she didn't know. And I said to myself, it's such a complicated issue. We have a lot of propaganda. There's a lot of rhetoric. If I can humanize this issue, if I can sort of enable people to look at abortion not through politics but people, that will help us to sort of get to the heart of the matter, because abortion is fraught for good reason, and that's really what I tried to do in my book.
Josh, you're something of an expert in secrets. You've done multiple books and reporting uncovering things. It took a lot of work to find Shelley Thornton, who is the Roe baby. She spoke to you and is now public for the first time. Where does she stand on this law that bears her name?
I think one of the things that's hard for her, when she was 18 years old, that's when she found out who she was. A tabloid sort of approached her and said, we're going to go forward whether you want to or not. And they were pressing her, pro-life, pro-choice, pro-life, pro-choice. And it was the first time she was sort of forced to think about it. Well, why does a person have to choose sides? In the end, what she said was, and she was very much sort of in the middle. I would say her life sort of resisted the sort of pat, pro-life, pro-choice, these categories that we can assign people. In the end, she said that she herself didn't feel comfortable having an abortion, and yet she believed that a woman should have the legal right to choose.
She's pro-choice in the end. And I shouldn't say law, I should say Supreme Court ruling.
That's exactly right.
People are going to read this book. I think millions of people are going to read this book. It's a fantastic achievement. One of the ways they're going to read it is for ammunition in what is essentially a 40-year culture war.
That's right.
Pro-abortion rights.
Yep.
Who has more ammo?
I would say this book is somewhat unique in terms of books about Roe and abortion, because there really is information that both sides can be very happy with. For example, we mentioned the Roe baby. She had always been a symbol. We didn't know who she was, but now the pro-life can point, aha, this person exists. Had Roe not had abortion been legal when Norma brought her case, this person, this human being would not be alive. That's something they would like to point to. They will point as well, let's say, to Sarah Weddington, the lawyer who argued the case in front of the Supreme Court when she was just 26. And I reveal how she didn't treat Norma properly. Amongst many other things she didn't do right. She didn't treat her co-counsel properly. That's something that they will sort of delight in. On the other side, you know, and I didn't set about trying to sort of ammunition. I tried to write the truth. But on the other side, the pro-choice will say, hey, the pro-life are always saying, you know, a woman should give up her child. She should not have an abortion. She should give up her child so that child can be placed for adoption. Well, I show in the book that actually adoption is a very difficult thing for women who give their children up, whereas actually the overwhelming majority of women who have an abortion, they report feeling relief, not regret, which is the opposite of what the pro-life wish to say.
Yeah. In this book, you write on the incompatibility of sex and religion, but in America, these two things are inextricably intertwined.
Yeah.
Do you ever feel like there will be some uniformity when it comes to these two things?
You know, that's a great question. The thing that was very helpful to me in writing this book, I wanted to be able to write about America at large, about abortion in America through human beings. And Norma and her family, they were sort of riven and pulled apart by the very same things, sex and religion, that I feel have pulled this country apart. And it didn't have to be that way. Sex and religion are not by nature incompatible, but they've come to be in this country. Do I think at this point that those two things will suddenly be, you know, bridged and people will look at it differently? I unfortunately don't. I think there's too much that's happened. It's become so politicized.
Yeah.
But I do think that if people can look at these stories and see what happened not only to Norma, but her mother and her grandmother, other people who felt that those two things were incompatible, I think that putting a human face on this will enable people to better understand both sides of the divide.
And let's talk about the human face of Shelley, whose baby wrote. She never met her mother. Their relationship was very complicated.
Yeah.
She talked to her, but she never met her. Why?
So when they've learned about each other in 1989, Shelley understandably was not happy. Norma had sought her out so that they could have sort of a very public reunion. She thought it'd be good. They could travel. They could perhaps earn money together.
They had a very difficult phone call. That's what I want to get to.
They did. Norma called her. They ended up having a sort of a falling out on the phone. And Norma actually said to her that you need to thank me. And Shelley said, why? And she said, for not aborting you, which is a horrible thing to say. Obviously, Norma had wanted to do just that, but at that point, Shelley said, we called it quits. I knew I'd never be able to have a relationship
And
with her.
briefly, could you talk about the timing of the book? You've been writing about it as you researching, but now it's coming out at the same time that Texas is considering this.
Yeah, it's a very bizarre thing. I started, as I said.
Roe v. Wade is in trouble, isn't it?
It's in a lot of trouble. You know, people are focused right now on the law in Texas, but the bigger threat to Roe is what's the Supreme Court is hearing a case called Dobbs out of Jackson, Mississippi. That case goes right to the heart of Roe, which is the sort of viability threshold, the fact that abortion ought to be legal right up to viability. The Supreme Court can overturn that. And people are focused right on Texas. If it is overturned, and if Roe goes back to the states, abortion will be illegal in almost half of them.
You wanted to show the
terrifying for a
humanity
lot of
on both
people.
sides of the verses in Roe v. Wade. You've done that. It's a fantastic achievement.
Thank you very much.
It really
I
is.
appreciate it. It was a lot of years.
Because it's very complicated.
It's a lot of years of your life, and it's a lot of hard work.
It is. It
You did a
is.
very
Capturing
good
it.
job.
Well
I
done.
appreciate it very much.
All right, aren't you glad you came this morning?
I'm very glad.
We're glad you came.
Good luck
too.
on the tour.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The Family Roe is the name of Josh Prager's book. It's The Family Roe, An American Story, to be correct. It goes on sale tomorrow, wherever you like to buy your books.